Well, welcome everyone. It's so good to see you. My name is Bernadine Jocelyn, and on behalf of Blandin Foundation and our conference co-sponsors, Deeds Office of Broadband Development, it's my honor and my privilege to greet and welcome you to the first plenary gathering of this year's Border-to-Border Broadband Conference, Bridging the Gaps, Expanding the Impact. It's truly wonderful to see you all here today, and I hope you've enjoyed a fun and interesting day so far. With this session, Building Bridges, Expanding the Impact with Cooperation, we want to offer a framework for thinking about how to achieve Minnesota's broadband goals that puts communities at the center. As conference hosts, both Blandin Foundation and the Office of Broadband Development share a commitment to ensure that the perspectives and experience of rural communities are well represented in public policy decision-making that impacts those communities. Like governments and not-for-profits, cooperatives, by their very nature, also put people first. According to Cooperative Principle number 7, concern for the community, cooperatives work for the sustainable development of their communities. Cooperatives understand that their member customers and the communities that they serve and that they live in need access to good broadband to survive and thrive. And according to Cooperative Principle number 6, cooperation among cooperatives, you're most successful when you cooperate with others who know how to cooperate. So these principles of the cooperative movement align really well with Blandin Foundation's experience that successful, sustainable partnerships are built on shared values and a common purpose. In this case, community betterment through better broadband. So this makes cooperatives uniquely positioned to partner with communities and the state for the benefit of the rural communities that we all serve. And financial returns from co-op networks remain in the communities. Moreover, cooperatives provide the best broadband service in Minnesota. This is a map familiar to many of us in the room, and if your home is served by a rural broadband cooperative, it's likely that you have broadband that exceeds Minnesota's broadband goals. A lot of the big blue spaces on this map are served by Minnesota's cooperatives. In sum, our experience has led us to conclude that rural broadband cooperatives, especially in partnership with local units of government, are well positioned to play an even bigger role in helping Minnesota reach its broadband goals. In part, this is because building a business case for broadband investment in unserved or underserved areas of Minnesota is really challenging. It's really hard for investor-owned providers. Cooperatives, on the other hand, because they're member-owned and because they exist for community betterment, they can be more patient investors. And what's more, Minnesota already boasts significant cooperative assets on which we can build. These include our existing rural broadband and telephone cooperatives. We're so glad to see those of you with us here from those, that part of our economy. We have several existing examples of private-public partnerships between government units and cooperatives. We'll be hearing more from them throughout the conference. We also have an existing system of electric cooperatives who have established consumer base, technical staff, customer service, fiber optics, utility pole assets, all those assets to use in partnerships. And we have a multifaceted agricultural cooperative sector that provides services in food, energy, and chemicals with assets across the whole state. So all of that being said, challenges abound to making cooperatives a bigger part of Minnesota's broadband solution. If you're an existing broadband co-op, expanding beyond your current footprint can be costly and risky. And if you're an electric or agricultural cooperative, broadband's probably not at the heart of your organization's current mission or expertise, and it's going to involve entering an unfamiliar and competitive marketplace in a very dynamic industry, so it can be scary. And yet, if not for cooperatives, where else can rural communities look to for the organizational capacity, the business operations experience, and access to capital that are necessary to build world-class broadband networks in hard-to-serve rural Minnesota? Rural cooperatives have all of these assets in abundance. And it would be just great to see more of them put to work to address rural Minnesota's critical need for world-class broadband. By partnering across the cooperative sectors with telephone, electric, and ag co-ops working together, you've got scale, expertise, fiber networks and poles, existing customer base, financial assets, and access to capital. All of these together are a strong foundation for our success. So with us today to explore the challenges and opportunities for co-ops in the broadband space are two guests who are going to bring sector-wide and national perspectives to the conversation. After presentations from each of them and some opening discussion with everybody, we're going to invite you into conversation at your tables to talk a little bit about what you've heard in the presentations. And then we'll conclude by sharing back to the whole some of the highlights from your table conversations. And so at this time, Kevin, I'd like to invite you to come on up here, and I'm going to introduce you as you make your way forward. Kevin Edberg is the Executive Director of Cooperative Development Services, a nonprofit organization providing organizational and business development support to new and existing cooperatives in the Upper Midwest. Increasingly in his work, Kevin is focusing on promoting the cooperative model as a tool for community-based economic development. Kevin serves on a number of boards in the nonprofit, cooperative, and public sectors, and for 28 years he's served on the school board and the city council in his hometown of White Bear Lake. Please join me in welcoming Kevin Edberg.
I'm pleased to be with you today. I'm pleased to be in the presence of community leaders. And my goal today, you will hear over the course of this conference a whole lot of conversation about technical and financial issues that must be addressed if you're going to bring broadband service to your communities. My goal is not to amplify or even to really speak to that topic at all. But I am interested in talking to you about the way in which you go about developing your projects, the way that you might give voice and birth to businesses that will operate and serve your communities. And it's in that spirit that I would like to address you today. So I've titled my presentation today, Vision, Values, Cooperation, and Generative Economies. And I'll touch briefly on each of those as we go through. So in my world for the last 20 years, I've been privileged to work in the area of helping to try and understand what it is that allows people to cooperate. I'm going to tell you that we really know how to compete because that is an instinctual response rooted in our very primal instinct of fight or flight. We know how to compete. We know how to enter into combat, all right? And it's instinctual. We really don't think about it because it's a product of our most primitive portion of our brain, the amygdala. It has worked well for us in helping us survive as a species and has kept us out of danger in many occasions. But it is, I want to emphasize, the most primitive portion of our brain. I also want to acknowledge that we as a human species are a social species. Since the very earliest days of walking out of Old Divide Gorge, we have traveled in groups, formed families, shared common hearths, and grown in our ability to cooperate together. The aspect of cooperation is not a foreign trait to us as a species, but it is, while somewhat instinctual, much of our cooperation takes place in the slower acting frontal cortex of our brain, where we ponder and we understand and make permanent change in how we think. But it's in the more advanced portions of our brain, and it takes longer. It is sometimes not quite as instinctual, and sometimes that faster acting amygdala drives some of our behavior. I think we can look around our country and around our world and see some examples of that even today. I also want to make very clear that in the community, in the cooperative community, while we often talk about our roots in England in the middle 1800s, and I will reference some of that, I want to make clear that this aspect of cooperation belongs to the entire human family. We sit in the land of the Ojibwe, and one of the things that has fascinated me in my recent years is trying to understand that culture and that tradition's understanding of how to share resource and space and energy. These issues of cooperation and how we think about things are not a white person's game. They belong to our entire human family. The things that we call cooperatives have emerged out of this impulse to cooperate. We did not form legal structures first. It is this impulse that we wish to do things together and that we find advantage and pleasure in cooperating that has caused us to learn lessons about what are the things that help us cooperate best. And it is out of those conversations and experiences that we have evolved traditions and values and principles and laws. But I want to make clear, the laws did not come first. They're a more recent manifestation of this deeper impulse. So I'm pleased to be able to work in the cooperative sector, which is the only business model in the world with an internationally recognized set of values and principles. And I think that that has relevance to your work in communities as well. So our cooperative values, the things that we say, these are the things which undergird our ability to cooperate in more formal senses. These are the lessons learned. There is no thought police or cooperative police out there that will go around and say, you are not a cooperative because you are inadequately exercising self-help or self-responsibility or any of those attributes. We share them as values and we state them as values among us because our experience has been these are the things which promote our ability to create organizations with purpose and with integrity and that are worthy of trust. And so these are values that the cooperative community explicitly states, and they are recognized globally. In addition, we have articulated 7 principles that guide what cooperative action looks like when it is at its best. Again, there is no cooperative police. The Secretary of State will not go into your local Ace Hardware store, which is a member of a purchasing co-op, or your ag co-op, or your electric co-op, and revoke your certification to do business because ... We say these are the things that help us cooperate best. And so we say, for example, our first principle of open membership and open and voluntary membership. That membership is available to all who are able to use a cooperative's services, regardless of gender or race or any number of things. I would note that in the middle 1800s, things that we take for granted, in England in the middle 1800s, you could only vote if you were a landowner. And so people said, let us cooperate. They formed cooperatives to buy land, and each person who was a shareholder with a very small amount of money was able to gain the right to vote and therefore influence the policy of the communities and the nation in which they lived. In a very similar way, the women's suffrage movement, women were not permitted to vote. However, as early as the 1860s, women were entitled to vote, to hold shares, and to hold office inside of the cooperatives in England. That spirit came to America. We've seen it in this century, in the 1900s, in America, where it was the housing cooperatives, the integrated housing cooperatives of the 1950s in New York, were the only place that a young black lawyer named Thurgood Marshall Jr. could purchase a place to house his family and grow their family, was inside of a housing cooperative because of the segregated nature of the rest of the housing stock. In a similar way, the Highlander Center in Tennessee was teaching about economic democracy and one vote, one member, one vote, as they strove for the opportunity to eliminate the laws of Jim Crow and the opportunity for poll taxes in seeking the rights to vote for black Americans. And that all came out of this understanding of open and voluntary membership. We agree that there is democratic member control, one member, one vote. Seems kind of no-brainer perhaps to us today. That wasn't always the case, and this has been a part of our tradition within the cooperative community for 160 years. We believe in economic participation, meaning it is an obligation for us who are members to co-invest equitably in the creation of assets, and when there is profit, we share it equitably based on our participation in that enterprise. So, unlike our kind of fish in water sense that those who invest more get more of profit, no, we think about equity in this situation as being those who do more business have contributed more to the success and they ought to benefit more. So it's benefits based on patronage rather than on the shares owned. We talk about autonomy and independence. Perhaps in the post-war society, we think of the agricultural cooperatives that were created in Eastern Europe. Those were not autonomous. But we understand autonomy in the co-op community to mean the ability to preserve our abilities to do our business, to obtain our benefits, and to hold these things in a way that allows us and our future generations to continuously benefit from the work of our cooperative. We believe in education, training, and information. Not only we educate within the cooperatives so that we know how to use the business wisely, but we also seek to engage in the outward conversation around cooperatives so that others may know and understand what this business model has to offer. Perhaps this presentation right now is an example of that outward-facing aspect of education. As Bernadine mentioned, we do believe in cooperation among cooperatives, that when we do our work best, we do it by doing our business with people who share common values, common understanding, common language around what we are trying to achieve. And yes, we believe in concern for community, that our cooperative structures, whether that be in the rural electric sense, in an agricultural, food co-op, it doesn't matter. We think carefully and thoughtfully about how we are responsive to the needs of the communities that we operate inside of. That's the world that I get to work in on a daily basis, and I'm pleased and honored to be able to do it. But I want to shift enough about me. I want to talk about you and your roles as community leaders. The word community comes from the Latin communitas, which means those things that are shared or held together in common. In a very real sense, those of you who are community leaders are leaders for the things that we hold together. I want you to ponder what that means for you and your work as you seek to bring projects to your community that build and enhance the ability for your communities to benefit from a new technology, or anything else for that matter. Our conversation here today is surrounded by a discussion around broadband, clearly a critical part of the infrastructure of the 21st century. But this aspect that for you who are leading work in your communities, you are leaders of the things which your communities hold together. I would also suggest that you are holders of vision, not just for the people that live in your communities today, but a vision for the next generation and the generation to follow. And I would ask, as you think about what the projects are, what the businesses are that might be formed, what the partnerships are that might be formed coming out of your work, how is this aspect of intergenerational, future-oriented vision expressed in your thinking and in your work? One of the things that has inspired us over the last century and a half, century in America, longer in Europe, has been a sense of we want something for ourselves, and yes, we want it for our children, because if they don't have it, they will be impoverished, and our communities will be impoverished. This whole sense of thinking with a future in mind, not just a present, and certainly not just what is my internet bill going to be this month. We need to be thinking broadly and over time. And you as community leaders hold visions for your communities. I suggest in the cooperative world, when I work with a young co-op, we talk about steering committees, leaders such as yourselves and committees such as yourselves, holding an idea in trust for its eventual owners. And I think that might be a useful framing for you to think about. How do you and your partners hold your idea in trust for its eventual owners? It's a powerful way of unpacking that. I suggest to you that you are also voices for values, regardless of what your values are. The way you do your business, the way you hold your meetings, the way you conduct your activities inside of your communities, you are voices for values. And I would suggest that particularly in America today, we should spend great time thinking about what are the values we seek to hold and hold up in front of our communities. I'm not here to tell you what those ought to be, but I am telling you that you are well served by having an explicit conversation around the values that drive your work, and then how you share those values inside of your communities and with broader folks who are not yet part of the work that you're seeking to be. Values are critical. And I'm going to suggest, this is perhaps optional, you have the opportunity to be a creator of a generative economy. The alternative is an extractive economy. And I would suggest to you that the American experience, the decline of the middle class, the challenges that are coming because of our business model and the widening wealth gap are because we have collectively allowed and become really good at practicing extractive economics. We find ways of taking value and resource out of communities and concentrating them in other places through how we capitalize and how we govern the businesses that operate in our communities. It doesn't have to be that way. And so my hope for you is that you'll consider taking a look at a book that I have found one of the best and most profound that I have read in a couple of decades. It's a book called Owning Our Future. It's by Marjorie Kelly. My contact information is in your participant list. If you're interested in learning more about these aspects of generative economies, of cooperatives, of the work that's possible, I invite you to send me an email. And I'm going to tell you that 2 of the people who email me in the next week are going to get a free copy of this book. If you are not so lucky as to be one of those recipients, go to your local bookstore, your local independent bookstore, order a copy. And I assure you that it will open your eyes and give you new insights into how you might be doing your work and how you might consider engaging with your communities around this issue of broadband. Marjorie Kelly outlines 5 principles that constitute businesses that make up a generative economy. I'm not going to go into great detail. I'm going to give you a snippet. My intention with both our discussion of cooperatives and of these principles of generative economy are to tweak your interest. And if you are so inclined, to invite you and give you ways of buying into or seeking more information, seeking more thought about what these ideas might be. The first suggestion is that generative businesses inside of a generative economy have a living purpose. That means that they exude life. It goes beyond, it includes, but goes beyond care for environment or care for how we use natural resource. It also talks about the human architecture of the enterprises that we create. I'm going to suggest that we in Minnesota have been incredibly blessed by the living purpose that has been created and bequeathed to us by previous generations. I look around at the private colleges created by communities of faith and the hospital systems that have been created by communities of faith. Why? Because they wanted to make money as doctors? No, because they had the living purpose of seeing that their children were educated, that all people had access to health care. It was a living purpose that drove communities to invest, to scrimp, to save, and to create these living, breathing entities that have served us well in our state. I would suggest to you that we are blessed in Minnesota because we have the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, named this past year as the nation's top arboretum. The women of Minneapolis, when they brought their Miller husbands into the room and said, "You will fund the purchase of land out near Lake Minnetonka for the purpose of creating a landscape arboretum." They weren't doing that because they wanted to create a nursery industry that would grow and sell plants all over the country. That did happen, by the way. They wanted to have a place of beauty. They wanted Minnesotans to be able to enjoy and to experience beauty in the form of plants. And I would suggest to you that for those of you who like apples, the Honeycrisp, the Zestar, all of those stand on the shoulders of people not who sought to become a national favorite apple. They wanted to grow fruit that we could eat and enjoy here. And they had to work because none of the stuff that was developed elsewhere met that criteria. So we had to breed our own. These are all examples of living purpose. And I would encourage you to think in your communities, what are the enterprises, how will you do your business in the creation of broadband technology and the delivery of it? What will be its living purpose inside of your communities? Marjorie also talks about rooted membership. Those of us old enough to remember perhaps a slightly kinder, gentler American business era, a family-owned business, of multi-stakeholder consideration in the decisions of the boardroom, where we considered the impacts on our communities, on our employees, yes, on the owners of capital, but it was a balanced perspective, far more so than our mantra today of shareholder value. One important part of driving that conversation is the ownership is rooted in the communities and tangibly connected to the communities that they serve. Today, our models have driven ownership and the benefits of ownership to distant places, far distant from the places where they may extract or at least do their business. And that has a source that creates some of the challenges that we are experiencing. I would suggest in northern Minnesota, particularly, you can identify with that conversation, but I suspect that's global. It's not just in this region. So considering how we root businesses in our communities and their relationship and the stakeholders that we create for our businesses has an impact. In the sense of mission-controlled governance, it means that there is an overriding mission that is the alternative to finance purpose. In other words, we commonly understand, again, we are like fish in water. We don't understand that there's something other than water out there. We think that all business has as its primary purpose the requirement to generate profit for investors. That's not true. And our examples of our cooperatives that Bernadine talked about are clearly examples of that, as are others. There are many folks in here who come from family-run businesses that are equally well-suited and well-situated for this rooted membership, having connections to the communities in which they serve that are vital and real and rooted. One distinction that we might make is to look at the foundation control of the Otto Bremer banks and by the Otto Bremer Foundation. The mission of the banks is related to the mission of the foundation, and it's controlled at the level of governance. Interesting way of thinking about how do we govern these children that we are creating legally and throwing out into the world. Marjorie identifies stakeholder finance, meaning, yes, we have an obligation and an opportunity to invest in and to align ourselves with sources of capital that are aligned with our values and missions. Inside the cooperative world, folks at the, in the cooperative telecom and cooperative electric system have created organizations like the Cooperative Finance Corporation as a way of accessing capital inside of values-driven organizations that are aligned with the purpose and the means that they seek to operate. There are many other examples, but thinking about this aspect of stakeholder finance is a critical aspect. Marjorie's alternative describes Wall Street as casino finance. And in fact, if you look back at the experience in the Great Meltdown, the Great Recession, a primary driver of that was mortgage companies who issued mortgages, sliced and diced them and sold them into secondary markets and did not have to be responsible for the consequences of their action. This divorce that we have afforded legally persists to our detriment. And she talks about ethical networks, doing business with people who know and share our values and understand what we are trying to do, speak our language. I would encourage you, as you go about the connections inside of this conference today and tomorrow, to think about where are the networks that you can be a part of, the relationships and partnerships that you can form, and how do they fit inside of this context of ethical networks. So, does any of this matter? Nice blah, blah. I'm going to tell you it's important because we've been here before. The reason we have rural electrics today is because the utility providers of the early 20th century found it unprofitable. They could have a power line running right over the farm, but they found it unprofitable to serve their capital owners, to drop lines down to electrify the barn and the home. It was only when people acting in their self-interest but acting cooperatively created systems that resulted in the day that the lights came on. And maybe there are people in this room, perhaps there are your parents or grandparents, who will remember the day when mom or dad flipped a switch and there was a light bulb, or there was power down in the barn, making milking maybe a little bit easier. We have been here before, and I would suggest to you that the folks in the telecommunications, the big telecommunications part of the world today, it's not any different, folks. Those areas that are underserved because they are hard to serve and unprofitable to serve, they ain't coming to your doorsteps anytime soon unless you bribe them. Or you can think differently. I'm going to suggest to you as well, we'd better get good at this, particularly in rural Minnesota, because this issue ain't going away. We are going to have to be particularly adept. We're going to have to grow our muscle, our language, our relationships to allow us to accomplish in our communities and in our regions the things that we want. Because it ain't coming to us, and it ain't coming to us free. We're going to have to work for it. I suggest to you that there are patterns and histories and systems that exist, but we, in our rich latter 20th century ways, have gone the way of independence. And we're going to have to rediscover what it means to be reconnected to our neighbors and to our communities if we're going to have the things that we want. And so we'd better get good at it. I'd like to tell you show you a little video about one cooperative that I worked with. It started, 4 neighbors in northeast Minneapolis started talking in 2010 about vacant, blighted businesses on Central Avenue in northeast Minneapolis. And they said, you know, we ought to form a private business to buy up this real estate and transform it. 2 of the folks who happened to be affiliated with the East Side Food Co-op and said, no, let's do it as a cooperative. Over the next 2 years, they spent studying and researching. They incorporated in 2012. They bought 2 pieces of property, retrofitted both, and they issued this video. If you want to go online, look for Northeast Investment Cooperative on YouTube. There's 5 or 6 of them that kind of give you the chronology going back to 2012. It's worth looking at. But I'd like to share this 2014 update with you.
The Northeast community is a great neighborhood. Everybody knows it in Minnesota. But you know what? There were some properties that were just not doing well, and it was a drain on the whole neighborhood. So what did neighbors say? They said, we're going to do something about it.
NEIC is the nation's first commercial property investment co-op, and our goal is to bring local people and local control into a neighborhood that needs a bit of a facelift at times.
You've got to be here when you've seen the businesses close, and you've got to be here and wonder what's going to happen next. And it's happening right now.
You had 200 people who believed and made an investment of $1,000 to put neighbor-to-neighbor type capital in place so that they could rebuild a wonderful neighborhood.
When I heard what they were doing and it was an opportunity to directly be part of the change, I jumped on it.
You want to be kind of the spur of change in your community, and you want to be the one kind of driving what development goes on in your community and be a part of NEIC. You know, we're a community of neighbors coming together. Anyone in the cities can become a part of it and invest in Northeast Minneapolis.
I was able to talk one friend into it, and I'm working on a bunch more because they understand, but they don't quite see yet how it can work. And that's why I'm going to drag them down here to Fair State and see what we did, how beautiful this is, how a good idea that people ran with can turn into something solid.
One of the reasons that we chose this space was to have NEIC as our landlords. We thought it would be a really good fit for what we wanted to do. We are a cooperatively owned brewery, and it made a lot of sense for us to have cooperatively owned landlords. And similarly, we're one of the only people doing what we're doing in the country, and NEIC is, I think, the only cooperatively owned landlord and development corporation in the country.
I think the space is amazing. I think both the bakery and the brewery are beautiful.
Oh, my name is Aki Bernd. We are on 2506 Central Avenue in Minneapolis, Northeast, and you are actually in the bakery. You know, I was looking all over the Twin Cities for a space to lease, and I almost gave up. And then somebody gave me the hint and linked me to NEIC. Yeah, and that's a great job what these guys are doing.
The transformation of the space makes me feel really glad to be a part of it. It's just something tangible that you can see. It's like your investment, your money making an impact very visibly.
I'm proud of it. When we get together for these type of things, everyone is talking about community issues and community improvement in a positive way.
To be able to sit down and really talk about where we saw the neighborhood going, where we saw our businesses going, and how we wanted to work together to really transform this building and transform the way business is being done.
What's amazing is that since NEIC started, Central Avenue has changed a lot. We've seen a lot of investment, a lot of buildings being bought out and fixed up.
The momentum that started with these businesses, whatever happens next, I am excited to see it come, and I'm excited to be part of it.
It's already turned into a lively intersection. There's a lot going on here.
I would love to see another building get bought by NEIC. I think that's hopefully their next goal, or our next goal. I'm part of this.
There's more work to be done, both here on Central and in some other kind of blighted spots in the Northeast that might need our attention next.
This model of this community investment is positive in that it's possible and that it's successful and that we can keep going and continue the change on Central.
And the other thing that I want to see NEIC do next is to inspire somebody else to do it too.
Northeast Investment Cooperative, you know, they got it together, they did something about it, and I'm proud to know you, man. And this is innovative and amazing. It is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Maybe there are other folks in your communities that can identify with that story. Maybe not. I invite you to think through the opportunities that sit in front of you as a result of thinking differently about how we do the things that we want to have done. Let me close. It was 15 years ago today. 15 years ago today that we lost Paul and Sheila Wellstone. He was a friend of mine. He's a friend of tens of thousands, so it's not that particular. But I want to share that in his leadership, he always pointed to, yes, we can talk about I and me, but it's inside of a context of we and us. And I'd like to hold up the possibility as he often pointed to Gandhi, be the change you seek. So as you lead your businesses, as you lead the projects that you lead, not out of a spirit of admonition, but in a spirit of encouragement, may I offer to you encouragement that you be clear about the values that you hold, that you listen with your neighbors to articulate the vision that you want for you, your neighbors today, your children and your grandchildren tomorrow. That you think differently about the purposes of the enterprises that you might seek to create, if not in broadband, in whatever that next issue is. This stuff is going to be with us for a long time. We better grow our muscles to cooperate and our language to cooperate. And that in all of this, that you experience joy in working inside of your communities to try and accomplish something that's really hard and really tough, but that is worth doing today and tomorrow and for as many days as you can sustain the journey. Godspeed to you in all of your ventures that you are a part of.
I'm now privileged to invite to the stage a good friend and partner of all of us trying to do this work across the United States, Laura Withers. Laura has traveled to this gorgeous spot all the way from the East Coast, Washington, D.C., so she's made a long way to be with us, and we're so grateful to have her stories with us here today. Laura serves as Director for Communications of NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association. In that job, she oversees communication of association messages, including NTCA's legislative and regulatory policy positions, all their publications, their website, their marketing, social media, the whole kahuna. She's been at NTCA since 2012, and she's been working hard since then on helping the association promote small rural telecom companies as technology solutions for dealing with the challenges that rural America faces to get the broadband infrastructure that rural America needs and deserves. Thanks again, Laura, for traveling all this way to be with us, and please join me in giving Laura a warm Minnesota welcome.
Oh, good afternoon. I am very glad to be in Minnesota, and I did not grow up in the Midwest, but my boyfriend did, so I am actually a big Vikings fan. Yes. So I'm always glad to come to Minnesota and say hello to all the Vikings fans here. This is a picture of me at the game where the Vikings actually managed to lose to the Washington Redskins, which is very hard to do, but somehow they managed last fall. And as you can see, there's a pretty impressive following in DC of Vikings fans and a pretty impressive tailgate anytime they come to town. So I'm right there with you in rooting for the Vikings and know the whole song, and I won't sing it for you right now. But so as Bernadine mentioned, I am Director of Communications for NTCA. I've been with the association for 5 years. Before joining NTCA, I worked in the auto industry. And boy, I thought the auto industry was a heavily regulated industry, but it's nothing compared to telecom. And I've been spending the last 5 years learning that. And while I'm not going to tell you I'm an expert in all of the ins and outs of telecom regulation, I will tell you a little bit today about how regulation and what's happening in Washington fits into the conversation we're having today about broadband partnerships. But first, I just want to tell you a little bit about NTCA. We're a trade association that serves about 850 local community-based telephone companies and broadband providers. Some of our members do embrace the co-op business model, and like Kevin was saying, we have a fair number of about 400, 500 companies that have started as co-ops. In 2013, we merged with another association named OPASCO that represented small telephone companies that were not co-ops, and those would just be family-owned or commercial companies that sprouted up in much the same way as the co-ops came to be. In seeing a need in their local community for telecom services, many of our companies are getting ready to celebrate their 100-year anniversary, believe it or not, by celebrating that they have been in business since the early 1900s and mid-1900s to provide telephone service back in the day, and have really innovated through their own entrepreneurial spirit to become these community-focused, one-stop telecom and tech service providers. We actually the association began in 1954, and I was telling some folks over lunch, we began as a committee of folks over at the National Rural Electric Co-op Association, electric co-ops who were interested in bringing telephone service to their community, and we were before we were an association, we were just a committee of folks that were interested in telecom service, and they started an association, and here we are, more than 60 years later, going strong. We recently changed our mission, and I like it because it's much simpler than our old mission, and that is working on behalf of small broadband providers who are working on behalf of rural America. It really says it all. Another thing to know about our members is they receive about $2 billion a year from the federal government through the Universal Service Fund. I think everybody knows what that is because you have a similar program here in Minnesota. But essentially what that is it's a network user fee that all of us pay into if you pay a fee on your cell phone bill every month to a universal service program. It's collected by the federal government and then given out to small companies to help bridge that divide of density and cost to bring broadband services to areas of the country that don't have it. This is a map of where our members are located, and I kind of like to say that this is almost an inverse of the Verizon or AT&T coverage map that you might see them advertise. We see it a lot in the DC area because they've focused a lot of their marketing on their network. And if you look at it, you can see we're pretty heavy in the Midwest. We have great presence here in Minnesota. We have 32 member companies in the state of Minnesota, which is amazing. We have a lot in the Dakotas as well, and southeast part of the United States, Texas. We have members all the way out in Alaska, and so we have pretty good coverage across the country. We have members in 46 states, and they make up about 40% of the nation's landmass, but less than 5% of its subscribers. This next slide shows you some information about our members. 100% of NTCA member companies offer broadband to some portion of their serving territory, and that's under the FCC's definition of broadband at 25 megabits per second down. Our most recent member survey showed that 2/3 of our members are providing broadband to their customers at speeds greater than 25 Mbps, and 20% are providing speeds of between 10 and 25. That's a great improvement over the last 15 years. We started surveying our members in the early 2000s, and at that point they were providing dial-up at best, and some of them moved from dial-up to DSL. Most of them are now providing broadband on a fiber-based connection, and they're able to offer upwards of 25 and above. And many of our companies are actually providing a gigabit of speed. One of the things I've done at my time at NTCA is introduce a certification program for our companies that provide a gigabit, which is 1,000 megabits per second. And as of this month, we have about 140 of our member companies that have been certified as gig-capable providers all over the country, which is great and shows that they are really working as hard as they can to edge out their networks and bring those speeds higher and higher as they pump more time and energy into their networks. More than 3/4 of our member companies also provide some kind of video service. And while they don't make a lot of money on a video service, it really helps them be able to provide sort of the holy grail in telecom, which is a triple play: broadband, voice, traditional telephone, and then also a video service. In a lot of cases, that's an IP-based video service or a traditional cable service. A lot of our member companies, and actually most of them, also provide service to almost all of the schools and libraries in their territory. 95%, according to our most recent survey. And a lot of our members have made a very concerted effort to connect those key anchor institutions because, as all of you know, you can then connect other institutions, businesses, and residents from that fiber network. And in some cases, a local school or library may be the only broadband option for some students who do not have it at home because of the cost or availability issue. Of course, we all think what we do is cool and fun. But over this last year, we have really seen that rural broadband has become very much a buzz phrase in Washington, and I think you're seeing it out here in Minnesota as well. It is the new cool kids table in the cafeteria. Everybody is involved. Everybody wants to be involved. It's become a very political issue. I think that what's happening is residents in areas of the country, rural areas in particular, who have poor experiences with their broadband right now or no option at all, are getting very frustrated, and they're telling their politicians, and it's becoming a very hot topic in Washington. Of course, there's a blessing and a challenge with being the cool kids table. Everybody wants to sit with us, and the table's becoming a lot more crowded for some of our members who have been traditionally in this business for a long time. At NTCA, we have seen huge interest in Washington and among members of Congress in solving rural broadband challenges. Just in this last session, we had 7 congressional hearings since January that we have participated in. That's like one a month, and I will tell you right now that it's driving us crazy because we're so busy all the time, but it's been great exposure for this national challenge. We've had nearly 60 meetings with the FCC on rural broadband topics and in regards to ongoing reforms to this universal service program. Our media interest is reaching new heights, and as director of our PR program, we have seen a lot more interest on the national and local level in how to solve these rural broadband challenges for the same reasons people are talking to their members of Congress and local officials. They're talking to the media about how terrible in some cases their services are. We also saw the FCC chairman really make this an issue that he wants to sort of create a legacy on. And he is somebody who is from a rural town in Kansas and really takes this to heart. He actually made a Rural Broadband Month in August and celebrated rural broadband for the entire month of August, which kept us very busy in a time of year that we would normally be trying to get out of DC and go on vacation. So it's a blessing and a challenge. Being on the cool kids table means that we need to make sure that as that table gets more crowded and as more attention is paid to this topic, we continue to promote our members' role in this, in potential solutions and answer the question, where do our members fit in? And just to give you some background on the photo you're looking at, this is one of my members with a hashtag Rural is Cool bumper sticker on the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. So I want to show you one media clip that kind of encapsulates this issue and I think does a good job of showing you why rural broadband has become such a buzz phrase in Washington. And it touches on how broadband is being included in conversations about national infrastructure proposals and in actually injecting some cash through a federal program in improving our national infrastructure. And we like to think that broadband is a part of our national infrastructure and just as important as airports, roads, schools, libraries, transportation, So this clip will give you a little bit of an indication for how that discussion is happening in Washington. And this is from RFD TV.
The president hits the road this week to promote his $1 trillion infrastructure plan. Advocates hope support for the rural broadband will be on the agenda. RFD TV's Sarah Mock has the perspective from Washington, D.C.
Highways, bridges, and airports are critical parts of the American economy. But in the 21st century, digital connectivity is just as important.
If the water goes off, that's kind of a disadvantage. If your lights go off, oh, bummer. If your heat goes off, you'll get a blanket. But if your Wi-Fi goes off, that's a crisis. And that's kind of what happens out there in the world today is we're not going, sociologically, to David's point, to Congressman Scott's point, we're not going to keep these young people on the farm attracted there if they don't have the connectivity they're used to.
But making broadband available in rural communities and at an affordable price is a significant challenge.
So a large company, it's competitive for me, and frankly that's where I can make a lot of money. And what happens then is the rural communities that they actually historically have as a service territory get ignored, and the infrastructure is not put in, the investments are not made, and that's a part of rural America that gets left behind.
Small local providers offer an alternative to big companies, but they rely more heavily on government support from programs like the USDA's Rural Utility Service and the FCC's Universal Service.
Providing broadband to rural Americans, on average, standalone broadband costs well over $150 a month. Well, rural Americans can't afford to pay that kind of fee to make sure that they can stay connected. So how do you make sure that they have the same access to it? The two programs really need to work hand in hand. One, you've got to build the network, and the second part is you've got to make sure it's affordable.
The White House says that despite proposed cuts to the rural development budget, infrastructure goals, including rural broadband, are still high on the president's agenda.
The good news is this is square on the radar scope of the president as well as the FCC chairman. I've had conversations with him. He is anxiously awaiting the infrastructure plan where we can ambitiously take rural broadband ubiquitously across the country.
President Trump will be with Secretary Perdue in Ohio on Wednesday to discuss his plan for inland waterways. Advocates hope that the Secretary will be able to use this opportunity to bring rural broadband into the spotlight. In Washington, Sarah Mock, RFD TV News.
Okay, so my favorite part about that clip is Secretary Perdue's comments about the Wi-Fi going off. And I don't have kids, but many of my friends with children tell me it is a nightmare when the Wi-Fi is not working. The kids can't be helped. What's even worse is if you're in a community that has been affected by any of these natural disasters we've been having, they can't go outside and they can't stay inside because the Wi-Fi is not working. So I think that our country has come to a point where they recognize that Wi-Fi and broadband availability is absolutely necessary for modern life. And we talked this morning about we are no longer talking about a why question. We're talking about a how question. So that clip was just to show you how this topic is being dealt with in Washington. And really quick on the infrastructure debate, NTCA has advocated that broadband be included in a comprehensive infrastructure proposal. We haven't seen one come out of the administration yet. The Senate Democrats came out in January with a proposal to pump about $20 million into broadband deployment in our country. And I think right now they're trying to tackle tax reform, so we'll see when that happens. But we're here to talk about partnerships. One thing we have seen as we have analyzed the areas of the country that are in most need of service, we're seeing a tale of sort of two rural Americas emerging. And what I mean by that is the map I showed you of where NTCA member companies serve is very well served. The challenge is our co-ops and our commercial companies and our membership have been challenged with edging their networks out into unserved and underserved areas. And so what I mean by a tale of two rural Americas is that that blue portion of my map where the NTCA members are serving, it represents about less than 5% of the U.S. population, and like I said, 40% of the land mass. Our members have approximately 7 locations or 7 customers per square mile. That white area that was not reflective of where our member companies are serving is a mix of suburban, urban, exurban areas, and those are mostly served by what we call price cap regulated carriers, and those would be carriers that are regulated under the FCC's rules that put a cap on the prices they can charge for broadband services. Those would be the mid-sized carriers and the larger national carriers like Windstream, CenturyLink. I'm not going to disparage their efforts here. I think that they have made great strides in some areas, but when you look at the map, that's kind of the challenge, is that second rural America served by those carriers are still lagging behind in some cases. So that leads us to this discussion of partnerships. I think we're all here today to talk about how we can create more partnerships and not talk about why partnerships are needed. I think we all agree that they are. But just a few things to keep in mind about partnerships, in particular when you're talking about partnering with an incumbent telecom provider, a rural telco. Of course, deploying broadband is not easy. It's very expensive. We all know that. Sharing the cost with somebody is always going to be more feasible than going at it alone. Broadband is also a more competitive business than it used to be, and many of our companies are facing at least one competitor in their serving territory. It's highly technical. You must think about if you have the expertise in-house to learn all these technical and regulatory challenges. It can be all-consuming. It's certainly a full-time job and could distract a municipality or an electric co-op from doing other things. You need to have the capacity in place to explore this new venture. Of course, regulation. We face FCC and state voice and ETC obligations. Our members have to file a Form 477 broadband report with the FCC every year. They face CP&I or customer privacy regulations. CALEA law enforcement regulations, and then finally this thing called net neutrality, which is potentially a huge burdensome regulation. NTCA was successful in advocating to stave off new reporting requirements under net neutrality rules that were passed last year for our members, for our small business members, which was a big victory for us. But this issue is ongoing, so we could see it come back around again. So I don't say that to scare you away, but rather to make the point that partnerships can come in many forms and many flavors. And no one partnership is going to look like the next. So what I wanted to show you is that there might be different reasons for each partner to seek the other out. For example, electrics and municipalities might need better access to data or have their own infrastructure. They maybe own and maintain their own network, their own broadband fiber-based infrastructure already. Maybe they need a partner to help them find new areas of growth that has experience in telecommunications and all the regulations that I just mentioned. And that would allow both to better serve their community by working together and using both assets to find a synergy. Maybe the electric or municipality needs help with marketing the services. We talked a little bit this morning about, believe it or not, you can't just put the service in the ground and expect everybody to sign up right away. There is some need to create an outreach or marketing strategy. Maybe as municipalities, you need some help doing that, and you can find a telecom co-op who has experience putting marketing strategies in place. Maybe they have the marketing strategies and staff in place to do that, and you can find ways to reap benefits from that. And you'll see I have a little Halloween theme here with my candy. Another flavor, maybe you like candy corn better than Oreos. Another flavor might be the electric or municipality needs to find new lines of business or provide better services to their communities, and the telco is looking for new customers and has capacity to grow, and both want to create a better future for their community and certainly a better future for rural America. So the point here is partnerships can take many forms. And each arrangement is based on the needs of both parties, right? There's no right or wrong way to go about this. So unfortunately, I can't give you a roadmap that is going to tell you exactly how to put this in place, and you just have to take it and implement it. You have to have conversations with each other to figure out what's going to be the best solution. Another bit of advice that I would provide based on the case studies that we have seen that have been successful is don't think that just because you are two entities in the middle of Minnesota trying to make it work, you can't talk to others across the country or take advantage of resources that NTCA and other associations and RECA provide. We have done educational programs. We had a summit in Washington where we invited several of our members to come and learn about this topic and share their stories so that others could learn from it. It was really successful, and I think we'll probably repeat it. So very quickly, I know we're running out of time here, I will tell you about a couple case studies and partnerships that I think have really worked. And you guys are really succeeding in Minnesota with this and potentially leading the charge towards more of these partnerships. And many of the telcos in the room have done this and will be asked to share their successes with other NTCA members across the country. Sort of the first group that really succeeded at this and made waves in our industry for the success of it was 9 Star Connect in Indiana. And in 2011, Hancock Telecom and Central Indiana Power merged into what's now known as 9 Star Connect. Both the cooperatives overwhelmingly voted in favor of this, and it was a true merger where 9 Star was a new company created by the merger of the two. They have emerged as a leader in smart grid deployment and with the ability to provide advanced communication services to the unserved and underserved areas of Hancock County, Indiana. They also benefited from the fact that they are about 45 minutes from downtown Indianapolis. So they serve an area that is a little more exurban than rural and is growing very rapidly. Interesting part about this one is by using the communication division's fiber optic lines, the electric division can deploy smart meters that involve two-way communication between the meter and the central office, which created greater efficiencies. They didn't have to take trucks out on the road every time they had a trouble ticket, and it really provided them a much more visibility into their network. Another successful partnership was down in Kentucky, and this one was very different. People's Rural Telecom Co-op in McKee, Kentucky actually represents an area of the state that is very impoverished. And they were looking to create some job opportunities and some training opportunities for their citizens, and worked with Jackson Energy Cooperative and the Eastern Kentucky Concentrated Employment Program, which is a regional economic development program. And they offered 4-week training courses for prospective customer service reps in a former daycare that was located in an industrial park. The Energy Co-op and Owsley County, the local government, helped line up the rent and covered the rent for the building. And PRTC, the telecom co-op, provided the high-speed broadband for free. Through this program, they were able to create 350 new jobs, training people how to do customer service jobs from home. And that might sound like a small amount, but for a county that is one of the most impoverished counties in the country, it was a really big deal. So that was a great partnership. And then finally, here in Minnesota, you have so many good ones to talk about, but I'll just mention CTC has been a real leader in this. Our local co-op here in Brainerd, working with Cook County and Arrowhead all the way back in, 2009, and bringing service to an area that's not even contiguous to Brainerd. I think what you guys said, it's a good drive away. We actually had them out to our summit in Washington to talk about it, and I remember the interesting part about that was they did a really good job of merging the cultures of both organizations and finding ways to work together and making it very personal and finding ways to merge the two staffs so that they could work together well. And then there are so many more, but I will just mention a couple others that I found in my research that I think are represented here today. RS Fiber, which is a new broadband cooperative that serves most of Sibley County and some of Renville County, and I think we have somebody here from that project. And then Federated Telephone Co-op, an existing telephone company, which was awarded $4.95 million to build fiber to rural homes in Swift County, and worked with the county on some bonds to help support that as well. I'm sure there are more, and I'm sure I'm not covering them, but just know that you here in Minnesota are really doing a good job of promoting these partnerships and making them successful, and we are seeing that on the national level. So a few things to wrap up, and just things I think you should know before you make a go of this. One, rural telcos, those in NTCA's membership, are doing a great job of building out in their communities broadband services that connect local institutions, residents, and businesses, but their job certainly is not done, and sometimes they need help. Sometimes they need your help. Please don't be inefficient with your projects and overbuild existing networks. That is something that the federal government does not look very lightly upon. If you're receiving federal or state support for a project in an area that already has a broadband network and is served by an incumbent provider, maybe they're not doing a great job, I would really recommend that you look to try to strike up a conversation about a partnership with that provider instead of overbuilding or building on top of their existing network. It's wasteful, it's inefficient, and at NTCA, we really advocate for federal dollars to go to areas that do not have service or do not have networks. Finally, partnerships are just one tool in the toolkit. Maybe they won't always work. Maybe sometimes an electric co-op or a municipality needs to find a way to do it on their own, or maybe the telecom co-op cannot always support a project, and that certainly happens. But also keep in mind that if you don't do it, somebody else might. And that is more a message that we need to tell as a trade association to our members who may be looking at this discussion about partnerships as more of a competitive threat. And so at NTCA, what we have tried to do is tout the positive of creating these partnerships, discussing these partnerships, and not looking at as bringing the fox, into your house and giving them all the information that they need to take your business away from you. That's a message that some of our members are not quite hearing, but I think that with this continued focus on partnerships from NTCA, they will start seeing how successful relationships have been made and maybe look at this differently. And then lastly, I want to close with something that we did at NTCA to help facilitate this process. We got together with some of our other partners in Washington, including some of the lenders that Kevin mentioned, CFC, which is a lender that works with a lot of our member companies, the National Information Solutions Cooperative, which is a vendor that provides all sorts of billing solutions and other pieces of software to electric and telecom co-ops. And we created this campaign called Partners in Broadband. It really revolves around the website partnersinbroadband.com. It's sort of our match.com for broadband partnerships. And we promise we won't make you create a fancy profile picture or force you to have speed dating with people that you're not interested in. But we launched this as a way for us to create an online tool to collect information about people who might be interested in supporting a broadband project or entering into a broadband project with a telecom or electric provider or a municipality. And we launched it in June. We've had about 50 inquiries since we launched it in June. About half of those have been electrics looking for partners. Half have been wireless service providers or WISPs or municipalities, like many of you, looking for partners. The remainder have been vendors who are looking to connect with rural service providers. 2/3 of the inquiries, we've been able to find a nearby interested telco and start a conversation, and we've sort of left it at that. We're not privy to where those conversations go after they are started. Many of them probably will not pan out into anything, but I think it's pretty positive that out of 50 or so inquiries we've gotten, most of them we've been able to start a conversation, and we have 10 or 12 different groups right now at least talking to each other in different locations across the country. So in closing, I will leave you with this. Broadband partnerships are, I think, going to be the future of our industry, and certainly we have seen a local effort with our members leading projects in areas where they can. Costs are still a challenge. The federal government has not created a new mechanism to overcome those cost challenges. Some states have their own programs like Minnesota that have helped, but I think these partnerships are going to be the way of the future, and certainly as a trade association that supports community-based broadband and broadband produced by small businesses, we're going to continue to promote those partnerships where we can. I have a resource, I only brought 10 copies with me, but NTCA has created a guide for sort of a conversation starter for groups that might want to discuss how to start a partnership with another entity. And I have 10 copies of those on the table. If you provide me your contact information, I'd be happy to email it to you if I don't have enough copies for anybody. But with that, I will say thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for and thinking and sharing back. In the few minutes we have left, I'm going to invite first Laura and then Kevin to reflect back on what they heard and any reactions to what people thought about what you had to say.
Well, I think I am very encouraged by the localism of what I'm hearing. And also, I spend a lot of my time looking at how the national media and sometimes the local media tells this story, and then also part of my job is helping them tell our side of the story. And I have been encouraged, I'll just say over the last 6 months, with how much focus in the media and even in Washington there has been on finding local solutions. It used to be the case that we would hear a lot about, well, the largest carriers maybe need to carry the water on this, and we're going to maybe structure our federal support to help us find efficiencies and provide, federal support to carriers that can find scope and scale because they have, the size to do it. But we have really seen in Congress, in the media, even in the FCC with this new chairman, a focus on local solutions, and that bodes well for everybody in this room.
So maybe 3 things that come home to me. First is I'm encouraged by the amount of conversation that's already in place and ongoing and starting. And I was delighted when I heard several tables just saying, hey, we just spent our time mostly getting to know one another. That's a precursor to the other conversations that will follow. And so having those kinds of convenings like the Blandon Foundation offers and that you might offer in your own communities or in regions, those are that act of sitting together and having conversation is a really important thing. And yeah, we kind of poo-poo it, but it's not so poo-poo. It's a precursor to all that comes after. And so I appreciate the amount of goodwill, the conversation that's being reflected in the conversations. It's also being reflected in the work of folks like NTCA. And so this vision about partnerships, about how do we leverage the investments that have already been made, how do we leverage the relationships that already are in place, that strikes me as all good. So that's kind of one bucket. Second bucket that I heard is the need to communicate and build vision around what this technology offers and what it could do. So we heard everything from telemedicine to how do we provide education for our kids. Heard a story from a person that was in my office last week. The local police couldn't figure out why local middle schoolers were climbing on top of climbing up on the roof at night of the local library. They're trying to catch the signal because this library leaves the servers on, and they can get up there and catch a signal. Now, he also told me about the farmer that was up on the silo waving his phone, okay? He would catch a signal too. The person on the ground happened to be a person running for office, and the farmer up on the silo said, "Don't you move, I'm coming down, we need to talk." So this whole sense of building alignment around a vision of what can telecommunications, education, community vitality, all of those things, that's needed. And we need to build that broadly, because if that broad vision is not articulated and understood, we can't get to subscribership. And we can't get to the political will that allows government and other major entities in our communities to buy in. We need to create that sense of this is really important, it needs to happen, we know it can't happen today, we need to be laying the relationships and starting the conversations. And inside of that as well, I heard the conversation over here around the risks. And that takes me to my third bucket. I am not Pollyanna, and I sing Kumbaya, but not often, okay? Cooperation is hard. And the issues, if this were easy, a lot of things would already have happened, but it's not easy. And so this sense of local solutions, trying to figure out what we got to work with, what do we agree on, what are the places of rub and tension that we need to find some grease. It's like that's all part of the work that is to be done, and there's no cookie cutter. There's no one size fits all. So being prepared to wrestle, intellectually anyway, with those kinds of conversations in your communities is part and parcel of what your leadership is about. So in building vision, recognizing risk, figuring out what you can work with and how you can best manage risk, and then figuring out what's right for you in your situations. I think that's what I'm hearing coming out of the conversations.
Wow. Please join me in thanking our two panelists for their sharing. That was